Medieval warfare wasn't just swords, shields, and gallant knights clashing on horseback. Beneath the surface of chivalry and honor was a world of dark genius. Weapons so vicious, so unpredictable, or so devastating, they had to be banned almost as soon as they appeared. These weren't elegant tools of war. They were instruments of fear, chaos, and raw brutality, often breaking every rule of fair combat that medieval society claimed to value. Whether designed to maim, terrify, or completely change the rules of battle, these weapons were too dangerous to be left in circulation. Some were outlawed for their cruelty, others simply gave too much power to the wrong hands. Either way, their impact was unforgettable. Number 1. The Warhammer. In a time when the knight in shining armor represented the ultimate battlefield elite, the Warhammer became the rude awakening that shattered that illusion. Literally. As plate armor advanced, offering almost full body protection against slashes, stabs, and arrows, many believed the age of vulnerability was over. But that's when medieval weapon makers responded with raw physics and a stick. The Warhammer. Unlike bladed weapons, which relied on slicing or puncturing, the Warhammer delivered focused kinetic trauma. Its design wasn't fancy, just brutally efficient. It featured a solid hammerhead mounted on a wooden or metal shaft, often balanced with a spike on the opposite end. That spike wasn't decorative, it was for punching through helmets, chainmail, and even shields. While a sword might glance off a knight's armor, a well-placed hammer blow could cave in a breastplate or crumple a helmet like paper. The armor didn't need to break for the damage to be lethal. The sheer impact force could rattle the brain, shatter bones, or crush organs beneath the armor. This was the kind of weapon that ignored the elegance of knightly combat and focused entirely on results. And it didn't require years of fencing lessons, just muscle and rage. That's why Warhammers became the everyman's tool of destruction. A blacksmith, a farmer, or a foot soldier could pick one up and become a real threat to even the most prestigious mounted warrior. There were many variations. Some had long handles, making them ideal for swinging from horseback or from behind a shield wall. Others were compact, meant for tight spaces or one-handed use with a shield. The classic form often had a flat hammer side for blunt trauma and a pointed spike for punching through tough materials. Late-period models even added flanged faces or reinforced ridges, maximizing penetration on impact. The evolution of the Warhammer tracked alongside improvements in armor. As helmets got thicker, Warhammers got heavier or more pointed. When gorgets and breastplates became curved to deflect blows, smiths adapted hammerheads to concentrate energy on smaller contact points. It was a back-and-forth game of survival and destruction. Every new innovation in armor brought a new variation in hammer design intended to overcome it. One of the most well-documented uses of Warhammers came at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. The French nobility, weighed down by thick plate armor and stuck in muddy terrain, became easy targets for English soldiers armed with hammers and other blunt force weapons. Their armor became their own iron tombs. The Warhammer represents more than a weapon. It symbolizes the shift in medieval warfare away from elite, knight-on-knight duels to a grittier, more brutal, more democratic form of battle. It stripped away the pageantry and revealed the raw physics of war. No matter how shiny your armor, if someone hits you hard enough in the right spot, you're going down. Number 2, the flail. Among the most infamous weapons of the medieval era, the flail stood out not just for its brutality, but for its unpredictable, almost chaotic nature. At a glance, the weapon seemed deceptively simple. Just a wooden handle, a short chain, and a spiked metal ball at the end. But in the hands of a skilled warrior, it became a force of pure mayhem. The flail's main advantage was its flexibility. Unlike rigid weapons such as swords or axes, the flail's chain allowed the striking head to swing independently of the user's motion. This gave it a whip-like effect, enabling the spiked ball to bypass an opponent's shield or parry. A knight might raise a shield expecting to block a sword strike, only to have the flail arc around the edge and slam into the side of their helmet. Its motion was difficult to predict. both for the target and often the wielder. That made it a nightmare in close combat, and a serious risk in untrained hands. Training with a flail required more than brute strength. It demanded precise timing, excellent spatial awareness, and a good grasp of momentum. Historical records and modern reenactments both confirm that injuries during practice were common. Bruises, concussions, even broken bones. Fighters often hurt themselves before they ever faced an opponent. For this reason, flails were not standard-issue weapons. They were used by specialized fighters willing to invest the time, and often the pain, needed to master them. Despite its learning curve, the flail had significant tactical advantages. Against heavily armored foes, the spiked head could concentrate tremendous kinetic energy into a small impact area. The spikes themselves were designed to penetrate or dent armor, causing internal injuries even if the armor wasn't pierced outright. The impact was often enough to fracture bones, knock opponents unconscious, or render them incapable of continuing the fight. Different cultures and regions produced their own versions of the flail. Some had a single striking head, others featured 2 or 3, multiplying the danger. These multi-headed flails were especially vicious, turning every swing into a wide, erratic spread of destruction. Some designs even included hollowed-out metal balls that whistled when spun, creating a terrifying noise meant to intimidate opponents before the weapon struck. It was psychological warfare, medieval style. Knights and soldiers quickly recognized the danger. Manuals from the period include sections dedicated to defending against flails. Techniques involved creating distance, reading the rhythm of the swings, and attempting to trap the chain. But success was far from guaranteed. Even elite warriors could fall victim to one unpredictable strike. A mistimed block or an overconfident charge could end in disaster. The flail wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement. Brutal, wild, and unforgiving. In the chaos of medieval battle, few things sent enemies running faster than the sight and sound of a spiked ball whirling through the air. Number 3. The Golden Dog. Also known as the Goiden Dog, the Golden Dog was a weapon that perfectly embodied the principle of form follows function. At first glance, it seemed almost laughably primitive. A thick wooden shaft, usually about 4 to 5 feet long, capped with a sharp iron spike. Yet, this weapon played a critical role in one of the most decisive and unexpected military victories of the medieval era. The Golden Dog was famously used during the Battle of the Golden Spurs in 1302. This confrontation saw the urban militias and commoners of Flanders take on, and decisively defeat, France's elite mounted knights. The knights, armored head to toe and trained from boyhood in warfare, were widely considered Europe's most effective fighting force. But their confidence led to a miscalculation. They assumed sheer prestige and heavy armor would crush a ragtag group of tradesmen, artisans, and farmers. They were wrong. The Flemish had developed a simple yet brutally effective technique to counter cavalry charges. When a mounted knight charged, the militia would plant their Goedendag on the ground, spike upward. The force of the charge would cause the knight or his horse to impale themselves, stopping the momentum cold. If that didn't kill the knight outright, the blunt end of the weapon, used as a heavy club, would finish the job. This tactic transformed what looked like a basic stick into a tool of battlefield domination. The name Goedendag itself is the source of some debate. Some historians think it comes from the Dutch phrase for good day, possibly referencing the dark irony of greeting someone with a weapon to the face. Others suggest the name may relate to the sound the weapon made when striking a helmeted head. A grim, good day indeed. Regardless of its etymology, its impact was undeniable. One of the Golden Dog's greatest strengths was accessibility. It required virtually no training to use. You didn't need years of swordplay instruction or horsemanship lessons. If you could swing a bat or hold a broom, you could be deadly with a Goedendag. This democratization of battlefield lethality challenged the feudal order. Power shifted, even if just briefly, from the armored nobility to the hands of determined townsmen. In terms of construction, the weapon was a masterpiece of crude efficiency. The wooden shaft was thick enough to withstand heavy blows, and the iron spike could pierce armor or disable a horse. Variations of the Gudendog existed, some with longer shafts for use in tightly packed ranks, others shorter and more manageable for single combat. What they all shared was their utility against cavalry and their psychological effect. For knights who saw comrades fall to what looked like a sharpened fence post, the illusion of invulnerability vanished quickly. The Battle of the Golden Spurs wasn't just a military victory, it was a political statement. It proved that expensive armor and noble blood weren't enough to guarantee dominance. A simple weapon, wielded by the so-called common folk, could, and did, break the backbone of one of the most powerful armies in Europe. Number 4. The Vihander. The Vihander, German for two-hander, wasn't just a big sword, it was a battlefield statement. Measuring up to 6 feet in length and sometimes even more, this enormous two-handed weapon was the signature blade of a special class of warriors known as the Landsknechts, mercenaries who fought across Europe in the late 15th and 16th centuries. These guys didn't just fight, they demolished enemy formations with raw strength and brutal efficiency. The Zweihander's primary job was breaking pike formations. Pike squares were the dominant infantry tactic of the time, with rows of long spears forming deadly walls. But when a man wielding a Zweihander charged in, that wall could fall apart fast. One massive swing could sever several pike shafts, creating gaps that allowed allied troops to pour in. In many ways, the Zweihander was a scalpel made for breaking open the enemy's defensive line, except instead of delicate cuts, it carved through with the force of a sledgehammer. Because of its size and weight, most battlefield Zweihanders weighed between 6 to 8 pounds, though ceremonial ones were heavier. It demanded serious physical power. Not just anyone could carry one, let alone swing it effectively in the chaos of combat. That's why Zweihander users were often Doppelsöldners, or double paymen. These warriors received twice the standard mercenary salary because they were trusted with the riskiest and most physically demanding job, disrupting the enemy line. What made the Zweihander more than just a giant sword was its specialized design. Many featured a ricasso, an unsharpened section of blade just above the hilt. Fighters could grip this area for more control during close combat. Some even wrapped it in leather for better handling. Additionally, parrying hooks, small forward-facing guards on either side of the blade, helped trap, deflect, or control an opponent's weapon. These innovations allowed for more precision and control than one might expect from such a heavy blade. In battles, Vihander wielders often led charges or operated independently to disrupt formations. Their long reach made them ideal for fighting in tight corridors or near castle gates, where they could keep multiple opponents at bay. When one of these blades came swinging, most enemies didn't wait to see where it would land. Just the sight of a man carrying something that looked like a sharpened iron beam was enough to make enemies think twice. The psychological impact of the Zweihander was just as important as the physical. These swords were terrifying to behold. Carried over the shoulder like a banner of destruction, they turned the men who wielded them into walking warnings. Over time, some of these swords became status symbols. Ornate versions were made for parades and ceremonies, featuring gilded hilts, elaborate engravings, and intricate decorations. But on the battlefield, they were nothing short of devastating. In the hands of the right soldier, a Zweihander could shift the tide of battle with just a few devastating swings. Number 5. The Man-Catcher. In the brutal landscape of medieval warfare, not every weapon was designed to kill. Some were built with a very different goal: capturing high-value targets alive. The Man-Catcher was one of the strangest and most ingenious tools developed for this purpose. It looked like something between a farming tool and a torture device. A long pole with a spring-loaded metal collar at the end, lined with inward-facing spikes. When used correctly, it would clamp down around a person's neck, arm, or even torso, locking them in place with barbs that made escape nearly impossible without serious injury. The main idea behind the man-catcher was economic. Capturing a knight or noble alive could bring in a fortune through ransom. A suit of armor might be expensive, but the man inside it was often worth far more. Some ransoms could equal years of income for a town or estate. So instead of smashing someone's skull in, it made more financial sense to yank them off their horse, pin them down, and send a messenger to their family with a price tag. The man-catcher allowed soldiers to do just that, and safely. With its long shaft, a user could reach mounted enemies without getting too close, snag them with the spiked collar, and twist them out of the saddle. Once on the ground, a knight, weighed down by armor and limited mobility, was surprisingly easy to restrain. No sword duels needed, just aim, hook, and pull. Even better, wielding a man-catcher didn't require great strength, just decent timing and positioning. That made it a favorite for soldiers assigned to prisoner capture squads. But the man-catcher wasn't just for battlefield use. In cities across Europe, it served as a non-lethal law enforcement tool. Town guards used them to break up riots or capture criminals in tight, crowded streets. You could detain someone from a distance, keeping yourself out of reach from knives or clubs. Some urban versions even had enhanced features like ratcheting mechanisms that would tighten the grip if the target tried to escape. This made the man-catcher an effective deterrent. People knew that struggling would only make things worse. Its appearance alone was enough to inspire fear. The combination of cold iron, wicked spikes, and the knowledge that it wouldn't kill you, but it would definitely hurt, made the man-catcher a psychological weapon as well. It carried the implication that whoever was using it didn't just want you stopped, they wanted you taken alive, possibly humiliated, and definitely under control. Elite knights adapted by modifying their armor to resist man-catcher strikes. Reinforced neck plates, wider pauldrons, and specially shaped helmets all became part of the arms race between capture tools and personal defense. Military tactics evolved too. Armies began assigning small teams to identify and isolate noble targets during battle, using man-catchers in coordination with nets, lassos, or sheer numbers to bring them down. Though often overlooked in discussions of medieval weaponry, the man-catcher played a crucial role in the political and economic dimensions of warfare. It wasn't flashy, but it got results. Results measured in coin purses and political leverage rather than body counts. Number 6, the Morning Star. The Morning Star was one of the most brutally effective weapons to emerge from the medieval battlefield. Despite its almost primitive appearance, a wooden shaft topped with a heavy metal ball covered in spikes, it was engineered for maximum destruction. This weapon wasn't about finesse or elegant combat. It was about raw power, pain, and smashing through whatever stood in front of you. Each spike on a Morning Star served a very specific purpose: to focus the kinetic energy of a powerful swing into tiny surface areas. When those sharp points struck plate armor or chainmail, they concentrated so much force that they could puncture or deform even high-quality steel. And if the spike didn't go all the way through, the sheer impact alone was enough to shatter bones, concuss skulls, and cause internal injuries. It didn't need to cut, it simply crushed. Unlike swords, which could glance off armor, or flails, which required precise timing and control, the Morning Star was reliable. Its fixed head meant it had none of the chaotic swingback issues of chain weapons. That stability made it easier to use and safer for the person swinging it, especially in tight battlefield formations. The Morning Star was deadly in close combat, particularly effective when opponents were already off balance or pinned down. There were different versions of the Morning Star depending on the user and their battlefield role. Foot soldiers often carried longer, heavier models, sometimes requiring 2 hands to wield, ideal for swinging in wide arcs and clearing space. Cavalry favored shorter-handled variants, which were perfect for downward strikes from horseback. A mounted knight could bring the full force of their speed and elevation into a single devastating blow to the head or shoulder of an enemy. The psychological effect of the Morning Star can't be understated either. Just seeing a line of soldiers marching with these spiked weapons was often enough to rattle the nerves of even seasoned opponents. The brutal look of the weapon, like something ripped from a nightmare, sent a clear message. this fight wouldn't be clean or chivalrous. It would be savage. Interestingly, the name Morning Star might sound poetic, even gentle, but it's likely a dark medieval joke. The weapon's silhouette with radiating spikes resembled the planet Venus as it appears at dawn. But instead of heralding a new day, this star signaled broken bones and bloodshed. You didn't need to be a knight or a professional warrior to use it effectively. That made the Morning Star especially popular among militias and irregular forces. Training was minimal. As long as you had enough strength to lift and swing it, and knew not to hit your own foot, you were ready for battle. Number 7, the Beck de Corban. The Beck de Corban, French for raven's beak, was one of the most specialized and vicious anti-armor weapons of the late medieval battlefield. At first glance, it resembled a type of pole hammer, but its unique head design gave it a distinct tactical edge. Designed explicitly to deal with the growing effectiveness of full-plate armor, this weapon emerged as a direct response to the increasing cost and sophistication of knightly protection. The name comes from its most defining feature, a long, downward-curving spike that looked like a raven's beak. This beak wasn't just for looks. It was built to punch directly through steel. While a sword might glance off or bend, the Beck de Corban's beak focused all the user's energy into a single point, allowing it to pierce even well-crafted Milanese armor. Opposite the beak was often a hammer face, blunt and squared off, which could crush bones or helmets when a piercing strike wasn't an option. And then, as if that weren't enough, the top of the weapon typically ended in a long, thrusting spike, allowing it to function like a spear. What made this polearm especially dangerous wasn't just its versatility, it was the reach and leverage. The Beck de Corban was mounted on a shaft typically between 5 and 7 feet long, giving infantry soldiers the advantage of striking mounted knights from a distance. That length turned the weapon into a lever, amplifying force with every swing or jab. When swung with momentum, the beak could puncture steel. When driven down like a spike, it could skewer or hook enemies out of formation. In combat, trained fighters alternated between different techniques: thrusting to keep enemies at bay, hammering to stun or break through armor, and using the beak to snag, pull, or fatally puncture. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a toolkit for dismantling knights, quite literally. The curved beak could also be used to hook behind joints or armor edges to pull opponents down or off balance, exposing them for finishing blows. Elite foot soldiers favored the Beck de Corban, especially those facing heavily armored cavalry. It became a knight's worst nightmare, not because it was the most elegant weapon, but because it turned armor into little more than a false sense of security. Number 8, the Ballista. The Ballista was one of the most fearsome siege weapons of the medieval world, combining terrifying accuracy with overwhelming force. Essentially a giant crossbow on steroids, the Ballista could launch massive bolts, often over 3 feet long, at high speeds, using twisted ropes made of sinew, hair, or even rawhide as a source of stored energy. Unlike catapults that lobbed stones in high arcs, the Ballista fired in a straight, flat trajectory, turning its heavy bolts into giant spears that traveled so fast they could cut through multiple soldiers, shields, or wooden defenses with ease. Its design came from Roman military engineering but was refined throughout the medieval period, with some versions mounted on rotating bases or wheels to allow better battlefield mobility. These weapons weren't just for sieges, they were also used during open combat to disrupt enemy formations or eliminate high-value targets like commanders or knights. A well-placed bolt could pierce armor, punch through a rider and his horse, and even continue into a second soldier standing behind them. The crews operating ballistae required both skill and coordination. Typically, a team of 3 to 5 men handled the loading, aiming, and firing process. Winding the tension mechanism was physically demanding and time-consuming, but once ready, a trained crew could fire 2 to 3 bolts per minute. That firing rate made the Ballista not only powerful, but consistent enough to maintain pressure during a battle or siege. Psychologically, the Ballista was devastating. Soldiers often feared not just the weapon's impact, but the anticipation of being targeted. The unique creaking sound as it was cranked back signaled incoming death, often causing panic in tightly packed formations. Some commanders even used ballista shots strategically, aiming at officers or banner carriers to disrupt morale and communication lines within enemy ranks. In larger siege setups, massive ballistae were built to target towers, gatehouses, and fortified positions, softening defenses before a direct assault. While not as destructive as trebuchets against stone, their precision made them ideal for hitting narrow targets like murder holes or shooting through windows to take out defenders behind walls. Number 9. The Scorpion. The Scorpion was a compact but deadly piece of medieval siege technology that often flew under the radar, both literally and figuratively. While the massive ballista dominated attention with its size and power, the Scorpion played a much subtler role on the battlefield, bringing precise, high-speed death to specific targets. Think of it as the sniper rifle of the medieval world. It didn't just randomly launch massive projectiles at fortifications, it aimed to end key lives. This torsion-powered weapon relied on twisted skeins of sinew, hair, or other flexible organic material to store and release energy. When triggered, it launched slim, dart-like bolts with incredible speed, easily capable of piercing armor at distances over 400 yards. Its smaller frame allowed for faster loading and easier repositioning, which meant it could adapt to the flow of battle in ways heavier artillery like trebuchets or catapults simply couldn't. Skilled Scorpion operators could maintain a firing rate of up to 10 bolts per minute, an impressive feat, especially considering each shot had the potential to incapacitate or kill a high-value target. That rate of fire, combined with pinpoint accuracy, made the Scorpion a nightmare for commanders and officers. Enemy generals, standard bearers, or anyone giving orders from behind the lines suddenly found themselves within lethal reach. One well-placed shot could turn the tide of battle without the need for a full assault. Beyond the physical threat, the Scorpion carried massive psychological weight. Medieval soldiers learned to fear not just who was in front of them, but what might be lurking hundreds of yards away. Silent, steady, and aimed right at their backs. Chroniclers of the time spoke of phantom deaths, where men dropped in the middle of a sentence, pierced by bolts they never saw coming. This element of invisible danger gave rise to its grim nickname, the Sting of Death. Though not as well known as other siege weapons, the Scorpion proved itself repeatedly in campaigns across Europe and the Middle East, especially during the Crusades. Its speed, accuracy, and psychological power made it more than just a battlefield tool. It became a tactical weapon that forced enemies to rethink how and where they stood. In the end, the Scorpion wasn't just about killing, it was about control, intimidation, and disrupting the very command structures that held armies together. Number 10. The Trebuchet. The Trebuchet wasn't just a siege weapon, it was a medieval nightmare machine. Feared for its sheer size, devastating impact, and psychological terror. Often referred to as the king of medieval artillery, it used counterweight physics to launch massive projectiles with lethal precision. Unlike torsion-based engines like the Ballista, which relied on twisted ropes, the trebuchet operated through a gravity-powered mechanism. A giant counterweight, sometimes weighing several tons, would drop, causing the long throwing arm to whip forward and launch a payload, usually a stone weighing 200 to 300 pounds, hundreds of yards through the air. That might sound like overkill, but medieval fortifications were built thick and strong. Only a weapon capable of unleashing raw, concentrated force could punch through castle walls. And the trebuchet didn't just breach defenses, it pulverized them. Direct hits could collapse towers, crush gatehouses, and turn once impenetrable stone barriers into piles of rubble. The psychological toll was immense. Defenders watching their supposedly invincible walls crumble under a rain of boulders often lost the will to fight, long before the final breach. But it wasn't just the physical damage that made the trebuchet infamous. Its payloads were disturbingly creative. Siege engineers quickly learned that terror was a weapon too. In addition to stone, trebuchets hurled burning barrels, beehives, rotting animal carcasses, and, most notoriously, human corpses infected with plague. During the siege of Kaffa in 1347, Mongol forces launched diseased bodies into the city to spread infection, a move some historians consider the first use of biological warfare. The resulting outbreak helped ignite the Black Death, which would go on to devastate Europe. Assembling a trebuchet was no small task. It could take days or weeks and required dozens of skilled workers, engineers, and carpenters. But once in place, its mere presence was often enough to force a surrender. The knowledge that an unstoppable wave of destruction could be unleashed at any moment made morale collapse before a single shot was fired. Even in the age of gunpowder, the trebuchet remained in use for a surprisingly long time due to its reliability and brute force. Its legacy lives on as a symbol of medieval innovation, ruthless ingenuity, and the terrifying extremes of siege warfare.